a few years ago. In 2014, we actually moved to China and we lived there for 3 years. And while I was there, I was doing my PhD in acupuncture and Chinese medicine. And so what I was doing was trying to synthesize or understand acupuncture and Chinese medicine with the pranic healing system. And so during that time is when I started synthesizing all that information, and was given the opportunity to even start teaching and helping open up pranic healing in Mongolia. So it started as just like a quick um, it was actually Master Glenn had just started the Pranic Healing Research Institute, and I saw their post on Facebook, and I just commented on it and said, someday when I'm done with my PhD, I'd love to contribute research into pranic healing. And so I also saw that Master Glenn and Master Marilog were going to be teaching in Mongolia, and since it was so close to China, I just assumed that they would be stopping through Beijing. So I sent Master Marilog a message and just said, "Hey, it would be great if Sam and I, my wife, if we could just take you guys out to dinner and pick your brains a little bit on maybe doing research and pranic healing while we're here." And we haven't seen another pranic healer in a year since we've moved here. And so we set everything up that we were going to have dinner at a nice Thai restaurant. And then Master Glenn, not knowing this, messages me and says, "Hey, Jason, I see you're in China. It'd be great if we could get dinner and maybe chat about research and things like that. We're going to be there next week." And I said, "Oh, we've already got dinner plans at 7:30 on Thursday." And so we just talked about all the ways that we could integrate research into pranic healing. And then um, he said, "So I noticed that you teach pranic healing in Minnesota in the US under Master Ko. Would you be maybe willing to come with us this weekend to Mongolia? Because it's an hour and a half flight for you and it's a 23-hour journey for us. And if it works out great, then maybe you could have an opportunity to teach there." And so we just, in my mind, I was like, "There's no way this is going to work." But what came out of my mouth was, "Yes, Master Glenn, that sounds great. I would love to." And so we ended up going with them that weekend, and they had over 100 new pranic healing students to learn level one. And so we just asked, "Does anyone here speak English also that could translate for us?" And they said, "Sure, we'd love to." And then we just scheduled our first class, and it just kind of took off from there. And so for me, one of the biggest, um, I don't know, I would say most fulfilling times of my life was during that era of, at least, of teaching, was being in Mongolia and just seeing how pranic healing can go from being completely unknown to an area, can spread like wildfire and be completely assimilated into a culture and into a place that is completely foreign to the way that I grew up. So what drew me into spirituality and meditation, and ultimately what led me into pranic healing, was a universal longing or a calling that many people all over the world have, and that it doesn't matter your background, your religion, your ethnicity, your age, all of those things, that once you learn tools to assist with anxiety, depression, physical pain, and to kind of fulfill that deep spiritual longing that we all have, just how that's such a universal call that we all are looking for. So, um, so background, I'm going to be as open and transparent as I can, because initially when I thought of the topic for this class, it was basically surrounding COVID. And everyone was going under the global pandemic, and it was just in our news, in our face, constantly, day in, day out. And there wasn't much that we could do other than look at disease and impermanence in our face, day in, day out. But it wasn't in a healthy way, in a way that allow us to process and grow. It was very much fear-based, fear-oriented, and you had lots of misinformation that just made it a very stressful time to try and process um, life, impermanence, grief, all of those things. Because when we talk about death, it's not just death of the physical body or an impermanence being our impermanent physical life. There's a lot of things that were brought to the surface that were impermanent for all of us. And that could have been our careers, it could have been our health, it could have been the lives of people that we care about, that we're close to. All of those things became glaringly important or intense or in the forefront of our minds about how temporary just our basic human life is and things like that. And so, in the midst of all of that, where I live in Minnesota, where are all of you guys, by the way? I see a few of you. Because then, if I know, if you want to just type in the chat so I can kind of make it a little bit more so I'm not just talking at you. I still love teaching in person, and so that's different when I can read all of your faces and things like that. Most of you, I just can read your names. Um, but if I know where you are, I can get an idea of when you are too. It's 7 o'clock in the morning right now where I am. So a lot of my friends were like, I'll just listen to this talk later on. Or my friends on the West Coast, it's like 5 a.m. So um, looks like a lot in the Philippines here. So in the United States, in the last, I think it's been only 8 days now, most of us collectively witnessed the death of a man who was killed by a police officer. And the man was begging for his life, saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And the police officer just continued to kneel on this man's neck and throat to where he basically just blacked out and then died on the scene. And all of us witnessing that death, it moved us into this where on the news you see a lot of rioting, but a lot of community is getting together um, to try and make a lot of social change that is needed. And so this kind of made me a little more raw in the sense of that everything I want to talk about is now brought into a completely different um, perspective for me. And so it's not just about disease and things like that. It's injustice. It's temporary life. And so in for me, it's trying to take that understanding of death and the experience of death and to make it transformative. And so that's kind of what my goal for this talk is. And so anytime you talk to people about impermanence or life being temporary, it's common for all of us, like our anxiety is just like ugh, because we don't want to think about what it's like that we are going to die someday, or that everyone that we love is going to die someday, that our whole existence is temporary. And that is something that I would hope that we can start to have more dialogue on here in the West, to just talk about it more openly, so that life can be more celebrated. Um, and so I will give you some of my personal stories as to why I've always been um, driven to try and take risks that seemingly are kind of terrifying. Um, Moving to China, living there for 3 years, that was terrifying. Um, Even opening a new business for pranic healing, it's one of those things you feel called to do, but at the same time, to take that leap is terrifying. And so, for me, a big motivator my entire life has been a keen awareness of how impermanent my life is, how how little time that I actually have, and my body is still young. As of today, I'm 34 years old. Um, and so I've had this anxiety or this drive to look for spirituality and to feel kind of like I know what my sole purpose is in life at a very, very young age. So um, I don't usually share this story very publicly. I've shared it with maybe just a handful of some classes that I've taught, but I wanted to share with you my personal life in a way that you'll understand when I'm giving this talk that it's coming from my own understanding, my own background. It's not something I read in a book, although I did read lots about it, that it comes from something that is just very near and dear to me. So when I was growing up, my mom, she was an occupational therapist. So it was, if someone was in a car accident, something like that, she was always the one that would kind of help them relearn, okay, now that you can't have good use of your limb, how do we brush your teeth again? How do we comb your hair? How do we do all those things? And so growing up, I always had people around me that were in wheelchairs and things like that. And so that just from an early age was very normal to me. And my mom was also very open to holistic integrative medicine and things like that. At the time, it wasn't integrative medicine, we just called it alternative medicine. And so when I was probably 11 years old, my mom was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. And during that time is when I was exposed to spirituality in a very different sense, and alternative medicine. And so to help my mom with anxiety and things like that, she started to learn a lot of guided imagery or guided meditation. And so when I was a little kid, I would just sit there with her and do some of these meditations with her. And that could be something as simple as just being in the sun and then taking yourself into the beach and just imagining the waves and things like that. And so that allowed me to learn how to go within and to kind of tune out some of the noise of the physical world to cool myself down. And then to keep her body strong because of chemotherapy and things like that, she would do like Tai Chi. So I remember doing Tai Chi with my mom in the living room and just kind of slowly moving the hands around, and it started to feel like an energy ball in my hands. And so all of those like laid the foundation or gave me all the seeds to go into life where I am now. So one of the hard things when you love someone and you're watching them slowly deteriorate, it's hard because my mom was very, very devout Christian. And so she would always tell me, it's okay. God's going to save me. Jesus is going to save me. By the way, I'm going to go into this talk heavy and I will lighten it up from there. But I just have to kind of bring you to where I'm at and then explain how to let that transform you a little bit. So don't think that the whole thing is going to be this heavy. I just need to have a starting point. So when you're a kid and you're being told that, you know, God is going to heal me, God is going to heal me, and you see someone deteriorate, it creates this anger within you. At least it did for me. It wasn't that I stopped ever believing in God. It was just that it was, if I believe in you, how are you letting this happen? You know? And I was 11, 12 years old at the time. And so what happened was my mom got sicker and sicker. When it came time for her to transition, it was a home care. She was in her room. It was a home hospice setting, and we had all of our family all around her. And so my aunts, uncles, close cousins, things like that. And I was at the foot of the bed with my hands on my mom's feet. And I remember it feeling kind of like hyper real, which I'm sure starts to kind of happen when you're in an extremely emotionally tense setting. And every time that my mom's heart would beat, she would take like a deep, slow breath, right? And at some point, my stepdad was checking her pulse and finally says, "It's all right, it's 8:10 at night, and I'm sorry, you guys, that she's gone." And my whole family started bawling, and I didn't. I just sat there kind of blankly, and I heard a voice like a from a third person in my mind, but it wasn't me, and it was a female voice say, "It's okay, Jason, you're in shock." And it was like I all of a sudden started to lift up out of my body, but I could see the back of my head. It felt like I kind of went out in reverse. And so I'm lifting up out of my body and I'm just observing my family, everyone around me. I can see myself at the foot of the bed. And all of a sudden, I don't see angels. I didn't see God or anything like that, but I felt this overwhelming presence all around me that was loving and caring and omniscient and nurturing and kind of holding me. And I realized that that entity, that consciousness, was holding and supporting my mom as her soul was transitioning out of her body. And for whatever reason, I sort of started taking that trip with her. And then all of a sudden, as I'm about to go through the ceiling, I slowly started coming back towards my body. And as soon as I got to a point where I could look through my physical eyes again, I felt this hand kind of press down and anchor me in. And then, just like that, all the emotions flooded through me. So I started crying and I thought that it was my dad's hand on me. So then when I turned to hug my dad and my sister, they were still a space away from me. And so that experience sat with me, and really altered my understanding of what God is, what my mom meant when she said, it's okay, God's going to heal me, God's going to look after me. All of that shifted because it wasn't that my understanding of God was a theory anymore. It was that I palpably, tangibly felt this omniscience and this presence and this love surrounding me, but it also gave me an understanding of when you're watching impermanence happen or when someone physically transitioned, it also gave me a taste of what permanence is. It gave me an experience that we are not our physical forms. It gave me the experience that there is a spiritual reality that is taking place all around us simultaneously, and that our consciousness can exist outside of our physical body and can exist beyond our physical death. And so I was 13 when my mom passed, and for years I just had this burning to understand, what is the nature of suffering? What is it that why is it that we get sick? Why do we die? What's the point of life if we're all just going to go anyways? And so some people get that later in life, but for me it happened very early on. And so one of the things is that when I was probably 18 years old, I had a friend who was Hmong, and he's actually a monk right now. Yeah, Lee, if you're out there, I love you, brother. He gave me a book, and it's called the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And so this book was one of the first books that I really read on the spiritual path, that gave me an understanding at least from the Buddhist perspective of what's happening in our life as we go through what are called bardos, or different states of consciousness. And so there's a bardo of becoming. So that's when your soul is deciding to take on a new life, a new body, a new incarnation. Then you're born, you have your life, and then you also have the dying process. And then there's death, and then there's also the back to the journey of rebirth. And so this book also had probably the first meditations that I ever practiced. And so for me, since this was my deepest entry into meditation practice and spirituality, it's all based on Tibetan Buddhism and becoming close to a spiritual teacher known as Buddha Padmasambhava, or Guru Rinpoche. And so in pranic healing, for those of you who are not pranic healers, our teacher, Master Choa, who's behind me here, was the founder of pranic healing and what's called Arhatic yoga. In the heart of our spiritual practice, a lot of it is surrounding Tibetan Buddhism. And Master Choa's teacher was Buddha Padmasambhava. So once I came into pranic healing, it was one of those things where as soon as I was introduced to it being part of like a Tibetan Buddhist lineage, I just thought that was awesome, and I just sank right into it. So, but what kickstarted me into that was that I have another deep impermanent wound. And so when I was 20, my best friend took his own life. And because I had already been studying Buddhism, I'd been studying spirituality, I'd been doing meditations. It was like esoteric Christianity was here, Hinduism was over here, Buddhism was over here. I had lots of puzzle pieces, but I didn't feel connected to everything as a whole. And when my friend passed, I went into what most people would refer to as the dark night of the soul. And for me, that was when I was just kind of enveloped in a lot of anger and in different sadness than when my mom passed, because my mom was always fighting for her life, fighting to stay around. And even her dying experience was actually beautiful as it can be. So when I lost a friend to suicide, it was a very different way to grieve, and it was a very different experience. And so I was angry at him for not telling me what was going on, and I was angry at myself that I should have known better, that I didn't pry more. And I just couldn't help but be overwhelmed with grief. And it was at least a year of trying to find different healers or practices or find people that could give me some kind of an answer as to what I was looking for to just get out of that rut. And um, it was when I met someone who was a pranic healer. I was in college at the time, and it was in my first class on the intro to like holistic medicine. And so my college professor, she was a Reiki master, and I just said, I'm wallowing in misery right now, and I don't know how to get out of it. And she said, well, there's a man who's a pranic healer who's going to be coming in to talk to the class in a few weeks. And I think a lot of what you're going through, he might be able to help you with. And so when I sat down with him, um, I got to spend about 2 hours with him before the class started and just kind of laid everything out there and just said, this is was my spiritual practice. Now I'm faltering because I don't know up from down anymore. I'm just miserable. And I can't seem to get out of that rut. And so he just basically explained, well, when you go through grief and shock or trauma, is like your energy centers known as chakras, it's like they rupture open and you don't have a filter anymore. He's like, if they're healthy and strong, it's like they have a nice filter on them and they're not going to let all this negativity in and out nonstop. And so he said there's a practice called meditation on twin hearts. It's a loving kindness meditation. And so he said, we understand that the brain actually builds more neurons when you meditate on loving positive events. We call it neuroplasticity. And so he said, but energetically, it will allow you to flush out a lot of this anger or the lower emotions so that you can start to kind of process everything a little bit better. The first thing I did when I went home is I ordered all the books on pranic healing, but the meditation CDs, now we can just download them easily. I had to wait 2 weeks or whatever until UPS dropped it off. And so I remember the very first time that I did the meditation. For those of you who haven't done it before, I highly recommend that you look into it. If for local people, I have it every Tuesday at 7:30 where we do the practice together. Um, and in the meditation, when it says think of a happy event, um, I started to think of my best friend's laugh. And that was the first time that I had thought of something like that in almost a year. It was too painful before that to think of the happy things. And so I was overwhelmed by the grief of it, but that started to actually open up the heart and really allow some of the the anger to get let go. And so I did this meditation every day for I'd say 6, 7 months. And during that time, I still do it regularly. It was just I have a different spiritual practice where we do multiple meditations throughout the week, and it gave me the space to finally grieve appropriately, but also it allowed me to see things more clearly to where instead of being angry that my friend was taken from me, I was extremely grateful that I was able to have him in my life at all. when you realize that a lot of the people that we love the most, it's just a real chance encounter. It could have easily been you went this way, they went that way, or you got lunch at different times, you took different buses, you didn't bump into each other. You could have easily never met that person. And so the fact that you did, and then you have that time with them, that became a beautiful way of looking at my time with everyone is a gift. My time on earth is a gift. And so then as I still went back even further and reflected on my life with my mom, it healed a lot of those wounds too, of being like, oh, my mom was robbed from me. I didn't get to have a mom for all these things growing up. But then I realized I had a mom for 13 years that was a beautiful, amazing person that loved me immensely. And so I started to feel immense gratitude and love and appreciation for that time that I had. And what it did is it completely transformed the way that I interact with everybody. I always treat people knowing that they're not a permanent fixture in my life. And so whether that's students and of mine, or how I relate to my wife, no matter how much I annoy her, at the end of the day, I always know like my time with you is limited and precious. Even if I get 100 years, I have to honor and cherish that. My child, I have another one on the way. So I have a year and a half old and then a baby that's coming in October. And I know that my time with them is still limited, not from the sense of solely that we all grow old and die someday, but we all experience little deaths throughout our lives, little impermanences. And a lot of those we actually look forward to and we get excited about. Um, for me, it's when you look at your life, you can kind of observe times where you've known that you've died and been reborn in your own life. The person that I was before I learned pranic healing immediately died, and I was reborn into a new version of myself. I let that old part of me go that was angry, that was resentful, that was horribly depressed, and I let this new part of me to embrace love and light into my life. And so we all go through these. If you're getting out of a bad relationship, you have to let that old relationship die so that a new relationship can be born into your life. If it's a job or a career that you know is just eating away at you, you have to let that go so that it can die and be born again into a new phase of your life. And whether it's a career where we know that I'm only going to work for so many years and then I'm going to retire, we look forward to that a lot of times. Um, or it can be even when your children are growing up, we know that we're going to get them for the first 18 to 20 years of their life. And then they're going to grow and move out of the house and go to school, or I don't know what they're going to do in the future when robots are running around everywhere. But I know that that time is temporary, but it doesn't end. It continues to grow and evolve into a different area of life. And so death for many people is something they're terrified of. Where for me, one of the most beautiful quotes in this book is that the author Sogyal Rinpoche says, "Death is the mirror in which the entire meaning of your life is reflected." And so when we understand that we all have an exact birth date, but our death date we aren't sure of, but we know that it's going to happen, that if you use that information, it will actually transform a lot of the way that you look at your friends, your family, and things like that. So for me, anytime something came up in life that deep down, my initial tendency would to say no to, um, I started saying yes to more things because I knew that my time here is very limited. And I would even have it's almost like a practice that when I would go somewhere and do something that completely terrified me, I'd always be in my mind like, well, if I get struck by a bus the day after this, at least I accomplished this, whatever it was. And so there's a lot of things in my life that I do like that, or I approach like that, because I know I want to take and extract as much out of life as I can. I want to learn and grow as much as I can because I know there's a point in time where in this physical form that will end. And once you understand that you are a soul inhabiting or generating a physical form that you live and express yourself through, it's very liberating knowing that everything is temporary, because it reorients what is important in your life. So many of us, we go to work, we go to school, we have a routine that is constantly distracting us from the fact that we have a temporary existence, and it is beautiful, even the most horrific, painful parts of it, because you're not going to experience it forever, right? And so lots of things in my life have motivated me through my own impermanence. And the more that you experience yourself as an impermanent being, the more that you will actually be able to grow as the permanent self, the soul. And so that is the only way. Like when people used to ask the Buddha, what did you gain from enlightenment? He, and I'm paraphrasing, and basically said, I didn't gain anything with enlightenment, but I'll tell you what I let go of. I let go of anger. I let go of sadness. I let go of the fear of death. So once you understand that you are the immortal self inhabiting the body, and not just understanding it, but experiencing that, it will transform the way that you approach people. It's molded me as a dad, it's molded me as a husband, it's molded me as a brother, as a son, as just a human being, because I know everyone in my life is there for a short period of time. And so it allows me to love them in a way that it's it's hard to fathom. And so what I want to do when we before we end is kind of guide you through a practice that I do regularly, that makes it so that the next time that, hopefully today, when you see people that you care about and that you love, it's almost like you're seeing them with fresh eyes all over again. And you're able to send love and receive love from them in a way that is, um, it's very acutely just serene and beautiful, I guess. Um, so part of my topic, I'm just going to share my screen with you here for a second, um, is to talk about why, when I realized that my understanding of impermanence drove or motivated a lot of my desire to teach or to spread pranic healing. I also realized that when I looked at Master Choa's life, that it was the same for him. And so it's common for spiritual teachers that are relatively advanced to not necessarily live a very long life, because they come in with a mission, they come in with an idea of what it is that they need to fulfill in their life. And so whether that's, if you read the book Autobiography of a Yogi, um, the Paramhansa Yogananda, the spiritual teacher of that book, he's who brought yoga basically into the West as we know it now. And he only lived to be 55. Before him was a great spiritual teacher, and he was probably the late 1800s, early 1900s, was who brought yoga, the philosophy, to the West, but it didn't spread. It's kind of like he sowed the seeds for Yogananda to come afterwards. And he only lived to be like 39 years old. And so when I look at Master Choa's life, he passed away in March 2007, just after I came into pranic healing. And he was relatively young. He was 54 years old. And so when you see that a spiritual teacher, when they have in mind, I have an impermanent life and I have a goal that I need to accomplish, they work tirelessly to that goal. I'll share my screen here with you guys. So for me, one of the biggest pieces of all this was when Master Choa says that you should live an intense and extraordinary life. Knowing that your life is temporary, it allows you to have more depth and meaning to all of the experiences that we have. So for those of you who are not pranic healers, this is Grandmaster Choa Kok Sui. And so anytime I usually say my teacher or my spiritual teacher, I'm referring to him. And so he's also the one who's behind me here with the statue of the Buddha. So a lot of my deeper understanding of spirituality, it actually comes from him. So in Master Choa's life, if you look at his entire incarnation, from the day he was born to the day he transitioned, he lived 54 years, 7 months, and 4 days. And so why that's significant is that most of us, we live as if we can go on forever. And so if when you actually see a number associated with how much time that you have, it changes things. And so then when you take that further and you look at how much time he had to spread pranic healing, I just went with the book. The first book in pranic healing was published in 1987. I didn't know the exact date, so I just put it as his birth date, August 15th. And so from the time that he published the first book to the time that he passed, it was 19 years and some change. And if you look at where pranic healing has gone all over the entire world, you can see that I've been teaching pranic healing for 10 years and I'm just making a tiny dent in Minnesota. Whereas he took it and systematized the spiritual teaching and brought it all over the entire world. And I believe that a strong motivator for him was because he knew he had very limited and precious time. So one of the things, I believe it was Master Ko who said this, he was talking about, Master Choa had told his students, in your life, you should leave behind spiritual landmarks. So these are projects or works or things that when you go, when your body dies, you want to leave back things that people will remember you from. And so you can use that to think, how have I positively impacted my family, my friends? What have I done to make the world genuinely a better place? And it doesn't have to be massive. It can be a lot of little things too. But knowing that that's one of our goals in life is just to kind of leave down these little landmarks that allow us to spread joy and love and things like that into the world. All right. So when I look at how far pranic healing has spread in now 30 years, the 33 years, all over the world, with centers all over the world, it's a huge magnitude above anything that I feel like I could accomplish. Because even myself, I don't have a feeling or a sense of when I'm going to die. I take it in my mind that I know I'm going to someday, and I let that be a driving force. But great spiritual teachers have a more acute sense of when that date actually is. So as their body is approaching that date, they just work, trying to get out all of that teachings or that information. And so that's also why when you look at all of the books that Master Choa wrote, a lot of them he started writing in the last few years of his life, because he felt like, I need to get this information out. The time of me being able to give spiritual teachings in the physical world like that is closing. The gap is closing, and so he just wanted to make the biggest mark that he could, and that's why we have pranic healing the way that we do, and all of the other spiritual classes and meditation practices and things like that. And so one of the things for me was how I relate this to the teachings in Buddhism. So for those of you who haven't studied in depth the Buddha, the original Buddha was actually a prince named Siddhartha Gautama. And it's interesting because when you understand that he's a prince, with everything that's happening in modern times, you have to understand that a new way of looking at that was that Siddhartha was someone who was born in a very high level of privilege. So much so that his father was told when he was a child that if Siddhartha were to see sadness, sickness, death, anything like that, he would denounce the physical world and become the master or the king of his soul. Instead, if he never sees those, he could become a great king of his kingdom. So his father did everything he could to make sure that Siddhartha never saw a sick person, an old person, a dying person, nothing that could shake his consciousness into thinking that there's something beyond our day-to-day physical life. So what's interesting is that a lot of us are privileged in many ways in the modern age, where instead of having a father figure, we put lots of things in place to make it so that we are constantly distracted, so that we don't have to look at the fact that our life is temporary. And so that could be distracting ourselves with Netflix and movies and entertainment. It could be overwork. It could be any number of things that make it so that we don't really take in the true nature of our existence. And so, because the story is when he's around 28, he gets tired of just being in the palace and just wants to know what is outside of the palace walls. And so one of the servants, a friend of his, sneaks him over the wall, and they just start walking around the city. And at the first time is when they say he saw four sights. And so three of them I called the sights of impermanence. And so for the first time in his life, he sees an elderly person. So his father, before that, every time one of the servants would get to a certain age, he would have them leave, so that Siddhartha didn't understand or didn't really take in the fact that our body is always shifting and slowly decaying. Then he saw a sick person. And so because he was sheltered in a palace, he had the best food, he had clean water, no one around him was ever sick. If any of the servants ever got sick, they weren't allowed into the palace. So he never saw any of that. And then during one of the rituals or rites, they were carrying a dead body. And so it was the first time in his life that he had ever seen a deceased person. And it was the first time that he realized this life is not going to go on indefinitely. So shortly after that, he sees, I call the sight of permanence, where he sees a monk with a shaved head. And it was the first time at that point that he had seen someone that didn't care or was detached from our physical existence. Someone that was more focused on the world beyond what we have day in, day out. And so these were the things that shook Siddhartha to his core, where he realized everything that I see and everything that I know is inaccurate. It's a lie, but it's an impartial truth. So that is when he decided to leave all of his privilege, all of his comforts that he had, and to fully embrace the impermanence of life and to seek enlightenment. He wanted to have love and joy and things like that beyond the physical world. And so the idea is basically that he goes to different extremes, trying to where he's not eating hardly anything. Some of the paintings of him, he looks very emaciated, where he's starving himself, he's doing different things where he's saying, I don't want anything in the physical world. And then when he's almost dying, a woman comes to him and offers him some water, and he hears someone playing a guitar, and they're tuning the guitar. And if the guitar is too loose, it can't harmonize, it can't make a beautiful tune. If the guitar string is too tight, too rigid, it snaps and you can't make music. And so it all of a sudden gave him this realization that he was like the guitar string, where in his life he was going too tight, being too rigid, about to snap. And in his old life, where he was so comfortable and relaxed, that was another extreme where it didn't have any way to make music. And so he said life is about the middle path, or the middle approach. You want to have a spiritual practice that is of the physical world, but also of the spiritual world. And so for most of us in the modern time, why I always reflect back on Buddhism is because the middle path is for most of us the easiest way to do things. So it's not that I can't go to work. I still need to engage with family. I still need to do all of the things that could be a minor distraction from your spiritual life. But at the same time, I spend a certain amount of time every day in reflection and in meditation as a spiritual being. And so all of us are going through this right now, where instead of trying to be like having a, the king that's hiding everything from us, we day in, day out are now seeing sick people. You're hearing about COVID deaths regularly, and we're even seeing people dying. And what that does to us is, in I would urge you to let this motivate you to, instead of rising to intense fear about death, to make death a friend of yours, to make death the idea that you're going to have a short period of time to embrace the world. Let that be something that is motivating to you to erase. See, many people, when you talk about death, they think it's very heavy, where for me, it's the opposite. If life is really stressful and chaotic for me, when I start to think about my impermanence, all the stuff that doesn't matter, that's not important, just floats away from me. And all that I am left with is what is actually meaningful and important in my life. What things do I want to get rid of? What things do I want to hold on to and continue to practice? And so that's where a lot of times, I don't talk about this topic, because some people view it as being heavy, but it's, for me, a topic that erases everything from your mind that is really not important or that is trivial. It makes it very clear at the end of the day, what do I wish I would have done today? Who do I wish I would have called and talked with? Or what should I have let go of? Who should I have forgiven? All of those things become very clear when you start to befriend the idea of being impermanent. Right? So in the heart of the Buddhist teachings is that the Buddha talked about the Four Noble Truths. And so anytime we say in life there is suffering, by that it means we all are temporary beings and we are all going to be subjected to life, death, growth, injury, sickness. Because you have a human life, it means by nature you're going to experience some form of suffering. So the second noble truth, suffering is caused by unwholesome, unregulated desires. Usually that's that desire that you want everything to stay the same. We don't want things to change. And so one of those biggest things is that we don't want to admit that we are going to pass on, or that people that we love are going to pass on. We're afraid to admit our mortality, and that causes an immense amount of suffering. So we say that there's a way out of suffering. We don't have to be afraid of this temporary life. And the way out of suffering is by following the Eightfold Path. So in the Eightfold Path, I won't go through all of it, but the first step on the Eightfold Path is what he called right viewpoint. And so right viewpoint for me is understanding that we are the soul, and that can eliminate our fear of death. So most people go through life and they're afraid of death because they wholly identify with lots of things. We identify with our body, which means your gender, which means your race, which means your ethnicity, your hair color, your eye color. All of those things we'll identify with. And then we identify with our emotions, how we feel and think when we're going through life. We identify with who we are in a country. I'm American, or I'm Indian, or Filipino. It's one of those things where we identify with so many different things that are all temporary. And so when you can kind of bring that inward and identify with you as the spiritual being that experiences all of these things, that's when things start to shift for you a little bit, or you realize that even though there is an end, the consciousness will continue to move on with that. One of the things where we talk about impermanence is the more you understand who you are not, the more you understand who it is you actually are. And so one of those things that we'll practice is called I am the soul affirmation. And so this is what Master Choa would have us do usually before all of our meditation practice, just to acknowledge that you're not your physical form, you're not your emotions, you're not any of that, but you are the spiritual being dwelling inside of that, experiencing all of that. And so one of the things is that we can't take with us my shirt, my physical form, my house, all of my physical belongings when I transition, but I do carry my level of consciousness. And your level of consciousness grows. Imagine a light that gets brighter and brighter and more brilliant the more you grow, you learn, you give love into the world, you experience love, the more that you kind of embrace life and all of its ups, downs, and twists and turns. The consciousness within you begins to expand and grow and become brighter. So once you go transition, go through the bardos, the different states of heaven, or when you decide to then come back down into a physical form, what remains with you is your level of consciousness. So the brilliance of the soul is what goes with you from one life to another life to another life as you continue to grow and evolve. And so at some point, you completely lose fear of death because that light of your soul is so brilliant, is so bright that even your brain, your waking consciousness, is able to tap into that to a certain degree. So for those of you who aren't pranic healers, the the easiest practice that I'll guide you guys through is the I am the soul affirmation. So this is essentially what a small part of the affirmation is. And so when you say I am that I am, this is saying I am not the lower I am the higher soul. I am the spiritual being. I am not this body. I am not the emotion. I am not the thought. I am not the mind. I am the soul. So as you continue to say this prayer, as you continue to say this affirmation, it affirms within you again that you're not your suffering. I am not this anxiety. I am not this depression. I'm not this grief. I am not this anger. I'm not this hatred. Whatever it might be, I'm not these political ideas. I am not these social ideas. All of it, you are not that. You are the soul that is giving life or breathing energy into all of those things. And so um, I'll go back to this. I will want to end it with an actual practice where all of us can do like a short meditation together using this prayer. Um, I want you to understand that death is not an end, but death of anything is a transformation. And so it was St. Paul who said, I die daily in Christ. And so it's to understand that in meditation, in Christ consciousness, you transform yourself daily. You let go of parts of yourself that no longer serve you. And so parts of yourself die daily also. When you understand that you are a soul, to have physical life is temporary, like spiritual death, because most of us don't know that we're the soul until the body dies and you go back into eternal life as the soul. So in meditation, it allows you to experience those states being here and in a body. So again, letting go of unhealthy relationships, letting go of unwholesome behaviors, and a lot of times symbolically, death of the ego, it means it's a transformation of your lower nature. So all of us would like to let go of parts of us that are holding us back from experiencing love and joy and things like that. Anytime you let go of old resentments and you're able to forgive, it allows you to let part of your ego, part of your I-ness, part of that gets to die so that you can be transformed more into the eternal self. All right. So wherever you guys are, just sit comfortably in your chairs, set your things down, and just first close your eyes and just take a deep, slow breath in. Exhale all the way out. Inhale again. Exhale. I want us collectively as one to affirm wherever our minds are scattered, whether that be our work, our friends, our family, things we're stressed about, wherever our consciousness is spliced into all of these different things, let's just affirm we are calling back all of those parts of our soul into ourselves right now. To all the parts of myself that are spread too thin into too many areas, I am letting go, I am releasing, and I am withdrawing my energy back into myself. I am that I am. I am not this body. I am not the thought. I am not the emotion. I am not even the mind. The mind is just a subtle instrument of the soul. I am the soul. I am a spiritual being of divine intelligence, divine love, and divine power. I am that I am. I want you to imagine a brilliant pillar of white light in front of you. Now, slowly walk into this light, and as you do so, all of your physical body is being transformed into light. It is all being dissolved into this light where you can no longer discern your physical form from all the light surrounding you. I am that I am. I am not this body. Be aware of your emotions. Allow these emotions, your emotional body, to be dissolved and transformed into the light. All of your fears, all of your worries, any sadness, any anger, frustration is all being dissolved and transformed into light. Even love, even joy, happiness, all of these are being dissolved and transformed into light. I am that I am. I am not this body. I am not the thoughts. Allow all of your thoughts, your stream of consciousness, to be enveloped in this light, to be transformed into the light. Gently move into a state of pure awareness. Any of our goals, our plans, ideas, just let them all be dissolved and transformed into the light. I am that I am. I am the soul. Let the awareness and the light grow, expand. Let the light expand in all directions. Let your awareness also expand with it. Imagine an even more brilliant point of light, a giant sphere of light, and allow your light, your awareness, to drift into this brilliant white light. Just relax, be still, be aware, and just let go. Now allow your awareness, your consciousness, to float out of this brilliant white light. Come back into a pillar of brilliant white light. Be aware of the mind, your thoughts. Be aware of your emotions. Be aware of the love within you. And be aware of your physical body. Just gently move your fingers, your toes. Gently open your eyes. So that's a step down version of a practice in Tibetan Buddhism where you actually go through the dying process. So you lay the body down as you're practicing letting go of the physical form, letting it being transmuted into the light. And each step of the way you go into being the consciousness of a soul, every time you practice it, when you let go, you can go a little bit longer. And then as you come back down, it's like the soul reincarnating into a new life. Only this time, it allows us to reincarnate into our own lives again and again. So we can reflect on what is it that we wanted to let go? What is it that if I knew that today in this moment was the last moment I was going to have when I'm saying goodbye to all the things in my life, what are the things that I wish that I could still hold on to? And so once you can do that, it allows you to let go a lot easier, to forgive. It allows you to love everyone around you. If you knew that the time is at hand, when you come back, the way that you love your friends, your family becomes very different. If you believe that this might be the last time that I can see them. And so as you practice this again and again, where you are the soul and allowing parts of yourself to die daily, it allows you to be born into a spiritual life. And it allows this life to be transformed and transitioned from one of an ordinary life into an intense, extraordinary life, as Master Choa used to say. So I know it's 8:01, the time that we're all supposed to be done here. So for those of you that need to sign off, I just want to say thank you for allowing me this time to be part of your life and be part of your spiritual journey. If you guys have any questions in the chat, for those of you who want to stick around or stay, I'm willing to hang out for a few minutes here, and you can message me anything in the comments. Otherwise, for those of you who need to leave, Atma, Namaste. May your lives, your loved ones, your family, your friends, all be blessed with divine light, divine love, divine power. Go in peace. So now I can start to, I'm going into gallery view to see a lot of your faces, because before you're like little small squares for me to try and look at. So, hi Susan. Hengame. Thank you guys so much. I hope that, yeah, you learn something or can take something from it, and that we can, yeah, use impermanence as a way to bring joy to our lives, not fear and scary stuff.